Yo, 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 dear listeners, it's your boy Ethan, the guy who makes grammar fun and pizza romantic, back to kick things off on Sip&Talk. Welcome back, you awesome crew. You know, sometimes inspiration just bounces around like a hot pizza slice from hand to hand. This time, we're borrowing some serious vibes and info from our Taiwanese pals at the Sip, Stroll, Reflect show. They've got this wild episode, Little Pig Nation, the absurdity of China's 5,000-year historical narrative on EP12. And this sparked our dive into the crazy tales of China's supposed 5,000-year history. That led us to this gem of a topic, Little Pig Nation. Hey, it's about time we borrowed some material, right? So, buckle up, folks. Today, we're diving into a thought experiment, the rise of Little Pig Nation. What's this quirky idea all about? Stick around and let's unpack it together. Hit the comments with your thoughts. Sonny and Joe, take it away.
It's great to be diving into something new with you again. Honestly, we thought we were maybe going to catch up on some paperwork this week, but then this huge stack of sources just lands on our desk. You know, articles, research, your notes, and boom, the to-do list is overflowing again.
Happens every time.
It does. But hey, we honestly love it, so please keep sending those questions and all that material our way. It's basically how we keep the lights on and, frankly, how we stumble onto the really weird stuff.
And this week definitely qualifies as weird.
Oh, yeah. Today, we have found something truly unique. So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack this fascinating and, pretty strange thought experiment that was laid out in these sources you sent. It imagines this radically different future for China.
Mm-hmm.
And it uses that, bizarre setup to shine a light on really big ideas, nationalism, identity, how power actually works in our world.
And what's so compelling, I think, is how it takes things we sort of recognize, geopolitical shifts, cultural identity stuff, even propaganda, and just pushes them to this almost absurd extreme.
Right.
By making it weird, it somehow makes the underlying mechanics much clearer than just a straightforward analysis might. It's like holding up one of those funhouse mirrors to reality,
Yeah, exactly. A distorted reflection that shows you something true. Okay, let's step into this slightly warped reality that we're setting the scene near future. The year 2027. The sources paint this picture of, major global chaos.
Big time. Economic crisis hitting hard, climate change impacts you just can't ignore anymore, and a ton of internal discontent brewing inside China.
So widespread frustration, economic pain.
Exactly. A feeling that things just aren't working for ordinary folks, and this kind of instability, it just creates the perfect opening for someone.
And into this moment steps a figure named Piggy.
Yep.
Yes, Piggy. The sources describe him as this really charismatic, populist leader. He sets himself up as the ultimate defender of pure Han blood, right? And he managed to rally all these people who are just completely fed up with how things are.
Mm-hmm.
His slogans, pretty simple, pretty potent. Restore traditional culture. Share prosperity.
And that's where the revolution kicks off. Piggy organizes this group called the Pure Han Alliance, and they're smart about it. They use social media, they build underground networks, tap into local militias. Basically whatever it takes.
So not just protests.
Oh, no. The sources detail them launching actual uprisings, taking control of major cities, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and then eventually staging a successful coup right in Beijing, the Communist Party's central government. Overthrown.
Wow, just like that. So overnight, everything changes. A whole new regime is established. It's called the Shared Kitchen Country, though people often still just call it China.
Yeah.
Piggy declares this is the true Hanlid country. And the core idea is all about sharing resources, wealth, culture. The government itself sounds like this weird mix of populism and intense centralization.
Yeah, a real hybrid.
Pushing hard on Han tradition and explicitly chucking out communism, calling it a foreign ideology.
And that name, Shared Kitchen Country, it's definitely loaded. On the surface, it sounds kind of utopian, sharing resources and all that. But the sources point out it's also kind of a mocking jab at the old regime's ideas about class distribution, communal ownership stuff.
Okay, but the old guard, the CCP, they don't just vanish.
Nope, not at all. The sources say the Communist Party high command, basically defeated but not wiped out, manages to escape. they head south to Hainan Island.
Okay.
And they don't go empty-handed. They bring loyal military units, key officials, and crucial party assets. We're talking money, tech, military gear. They set up a temporary base there, declare themselves the legitimate People's Republic of China, and immediately start plotting how to get back to the mainland.
So a massive split, almost instantly.
A huge historical break.
Okay, so you've got Piggy and his shared kitchen country running the mainland, and the CCP remnants dug in on Hainan. What are the first things Piggy's new regime does, according to these sources?
Well, they hit the ground running. First off, Piggy declares the shared kitchen country is the only legitimate government and issues this pretty dramatic demand. The CCP on Hainan has to return to the motherland.
Wow, okay. Aggressive start.
Very. Then he starts rolling out these really radical policies.
Radical how? What kind of things?
Well, confiscating CCP assets, that's a big one, obviously. But maybe more fundamentally, they start forcing this idea of Han cultural identity on everyone.
What does that mean in practice?
It means pushing pure Han ideas in schools, in the media, actively trying to dilute or just stamp out the influence of ethnic minorities and anything connected to modern communism.
So like a cultural re-engineering project.
Exactly that. And on the military side, they create a new force, the Shared Guards, and make it crystal clear they plan to retake Hainan by force.
They actually say that.
Oh, yeah. They issue this blunt warning. Any attempt to split the country means war, basically. Diplomatically, Piggy's regime starts demanding international recognition, telling other countries to butt out of their internal affairs, and framing the Hainan situation as just a Chinese family matter.
A family matter they seem ready to settle with the Shared Guards. Okay, how does the rest of the world react to this? Because that's a massive sudden upheaval.
Yeah, it's chaos, right? Everyone's scrambling. The United States, the sources say, is extremely wary. I mean, Piggy's anti-communist line might sound good for about 5 seconds.
Right.
But his extreme nationalism, this whole pure Han concept, that immediately sets off huge alarm bells. We're talking major concerns about human rights, what happens to minorities, and obviously regional stability.
So the U.S. doesn't exactly rush to recognize them.
No way. The sources suggest they'd likely refuse immediate recognition, adopt a kind of neutral public stance, call for peace, you know the drill. But behind the scenes, actions speak louder. They'd almost certainly boost military support for allies, Taiwan, Japan, Southeast Asian nations, because they'd be worried Piggy isn't just looking inwards.
Right, worried about expansion.
Exactly. They might even offer some quiet help, maybe intelligence, to the Hainan CCP guys, but they'd be super careful not to be seen publicly interfering, using Piggy's own words back at him. The biggest anxieties: global supply chains, definitely, tech, manufacturing, and the potential for sanctions if Piggy's regime starts obvious human rights abuses.
Okay, that makes sense. What about Taiwan? This must be incredibly intense for them.
Oh, absolutely. The sources describe it as extremely tense. Think about it. Piggy claiming his shared kitchen country is the true China, and maybe seeing Taiwan as another splittist force, that's arguably more threatening than the old one country, two systems thing.
Yeah, it sounds more immediate, more aggressive maybe.
Potentially. They'd fear Piggy might use his unify the motherland talk as an excuse for military action, like right now.
So they're definitely not going to just wait and see.
No chance. Actions would be immediate. Strengthening their defenses, boosting the military budget, deepening ties with the U.S. and Japan. Diplomatically, they'd be working overtime, pushing for international support, highlighting their democracy, making it super clear they're not part of Piggy's regime, and lobbying hard against anyone recognizing Piggy's claim over Taiwan.
Publicly calling for peace, but privately prepping for conflict.
That's the picture the sources paint. And they even note this split public opinion inside Taiwan. Some folks may be relieved the CCP is gone, but others deeply worried that Piggy's hardcore nationalism is an even bigger problem. It's captured in this quote from the sources. It's quite striking. Change the pot to cook people, but the pot is still made in China.
Wow. Meaning the regime changed, but the underlying claim, the threat, is still there. Maybe worse.
Exactly. That fundamental nationalist claim remains.
Okay. What about the Communist Party on Hainan Island, the ones who just got kicked out? How are they reacting?
Furious. Humiliated. They see Piggy's whole thing as just blatant rebellion, an act of splitting the country. They're digging in, insisting they are the legitimate People's Republic of China.
So what can they actually do from an island?
Well, they set up that temporary government, for starters. Then they immediately reach out to their old allies. Think Russia, North Korea, desperate for military and economic help. They use whatever media and diplomatic channels they have left to absolutely trash Piggy, calling him a splittist, a populist tyrant trying to get international sympathy.
Trying to rally support.
Yeah, and they're prepping for a long struggle, planning a counterattack, even though realistically their resources are pretty limited compared to the mainland. And the sources hint there could be serious internal splits, finger-pointing about how they lost power.
Makes sense. And the rest of the world? The other neighbors? Bigger players?
It's a real mixed bag. Russia, likely playing it cool, maybe publicly backing their old CCP buddies on Hainan, but quietly cutting deals with Piggy if it benefits them economically.
Opportunistic.
Totally. And the sources suggest they're probably not too sad to see China tangled up in its own problems, less focus on global influence. Japan, immediately on high alert, super wary of this nationalist surge messing with the East China Sea. They double down on the U.S. alliance, boost their own maritime defense for sure.
And Southeast Asia?
Countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, they'd be really worried about a more aggressive China in the South China Sea disputes. They'd probably speed up their own military buildup and look for more support from the U.S., maybe India too.
And Europe, the UN.
The EU would likely be cautious, call for dialogue, focus on human rights, maybe threaten sanctions if trade gets hit hard or minorities are obviously being persecuted. The UN, they'd probably try to mediate, but Piggy's whole internal affairs line would tie their hands. Maybe some toothless resolutions,
Right. Okay, so that's the big picture, the geopolitics. What about the actual people living on the mainland under Piggy's new rule? What's life like for them?
The sources paint a pretty stark picture. Life changes drastically and fast. Citizens are forced to register under the new shared kitchen country. They have to accept this new pure Han cultural education. Any sign of loyalty to the old CCP, forbidden.
Constant propaganda.
Everywhere. Schools, media, workplaces just hammering home the message of Han tradition and why the new regime is legitimate. And for ethnic minorities like Uyghurs, Tibetans, it's much, much worse. They face intense oppression. We're talking forced name changes, suppression of their customs, severe limits on their culture and religion, if not outright bans.
That sounds terrifying. What about the economy? Does Piggy's sharing work?
Well, initially it's a disaster. The war, the transition chaos, it hits hard. Prices for everyday stuff shoot up, supply chains are a mess, and living standards fall for most people.
So how do people actually feel about all this? It can't be monolithic, right?
No, definitely not. The sources describe a really complex mix of reactions across the population. You've got the supporters, right? Maybe some Han folks, often the younger generation or lower income people who are genuinely unhappy with the old system.
They buy into the new beginning.
Yes, some are proud, see it as a national revival, and they're actually willing to help build this new regime. Then you have the opponents. These could be former CCP loyalists, intellectuals, maybe parts of the middle class who are scared at the populism, the radical changes, the loss of stability, maybe loss of freedom.
What happens to them?
They're forced to play along outwardly, accept the new identity. But some resist in secret or try desperately to get out, knowing they're under surveillance and face brutal suppression if caught. And minorities, as we said, are in a terrible position. Extreme unease, oppression, feeling totally marginalized. Their culture is under attack. There's secret resistance, yes, escape attempts, but they're facing immense pressure. But for the vast majority of ordinary citizens, the sources suggest they're mostly just confused, exhausted by all the change, struggling with the economy. Confidence is low. They're basically forced to accept the new identity just to survive day to day. The future feels incredibly uncertain, and probably a lot of them just miss the stability they had before, even if it wasn't perfect.
Okay, let's take a deep breath here. Because now the sources do something pretty wild. They jump forward in time. Not just a few years, but 70 years. 7 decades.
Yeah, it's a big leap.
We're in the year 2097. The shared kitchen country, or Piggy country as people call it, has ruled the mainland for 70 years. It hasn't just stayed the same, it's evolved, it's absorbed bits of the old system maybe, and it's become its own unique and, frankly, deeply unsettling type of totalitarian state.
70 years is definitely long enough for a regime to really dig in and reshape a society. The sources describe this solidified one-party state still under the pure Han alliance. Elections basically non-existent. Maybe they have these bizarre performance elections where people don't even know they're voting or who for. Power's totally centralized under whoever succeeded Piggy.
And information control. Still tight.
Tighter than ever. The internet is heavily filtered.
Yeah.
Foreign sites, VPNs, totally banned. Criticize Piggy country, that's illegal, lands you in prison or re-education.
Yeah.
And the brainwashing, it's intense. Starts from day one in school. Textbooks don't just teach history. They actively rewrite it, claiming Hainan and Taiwan always belonged to Piggy country, presenting this fictional past as the absolute truth of true China.
Okay, this is where it gets really strange, though, isn't it? This isn't just your standard political totalitarianism.
No, this is where the thought experiment really leans into the absurd to make its point. The propaganda, it isn't just political, it's dietary.
Dietary.
Yeah. They hammer home this idea not eating plump is illegal. They've somehow managed to make being fat the ultimate symbol of health, loyalty, and national prosperity. People are actively encouraged, almost required, to overeat.
Wait, eat more is patriotic. Is that like an actual slogan they use?
The sources say yes. There are literally eat more is patriotic memes, and it gets even crazier. They've apparently got an AI monitoring system.
An AI? For what?
It tracks citizens' weight and their diet. If the AI flags you as underplump, you get sent off to a diet re-education camp.
An AI checking your waistband.
Yeah.
That's just mind-bogglingly weird.
It is. But it's also chillingly logical within the insane rules of this regime they've built. And after 70 years of this, the sources say this bizarre ideology is completely normalized. People genuinely believe that eating plump isn't just a good idea, it's a legal and moral duty.
Wow.
And the idea that Hainan and Taiwan are just split territories that will eventually return, that's gospel truth. Piggy country openly threatens to use force against these places that don't eat plump, using the dietary difference as yet another excuse for their territorial ambitions.
So what's the actual result of forcing everyone to get plump, health-wise? Economically.
Internally, it's a massive health and economic crisis. Shocker, right? Forcing people to overeat leads to skyrocketing obesity rates, which completely overwhelms the healthcare system. Think diabetes, heart disease, everything.
Yeah, of course.
The economy gets totally warped too. Huge amounts of resources are poured into food production and this bizarre dietary propaganda machine. The sources even mention food shortages popping up in some areas, which the regime just spins as trials of the shared country, like tests of loyalty.
Is there any resistance left after 7 decades of this?
A little bit, yeah, but it's deep underground and faces brutal repression. The sources mention secret slimming alliances trying to promote actual health and independent thinking. And maybe a tiny flicker of hope. Some younger people manage to get their hands on black market VPNs, access outside info, and start to question the whole narrative.
And this whole bizarre system, it has a name. Fatationalism.
That's what the sources call it, yeah. Fatationalism. It's described as basically a semi-religious state cult, and the absurdity just keeps going. They imagine a national anthem, I eat plump, therefore I am.
Oh my God.
A children's slogan. Did you eat plump enough today? Otherwise, you're not Chinese. There's even an idea for the flag, like oily braised pork with stars shaped like pig noses.
It's a very specific and disturbing image.
It's designed to be memorable, right? To hammer home the absurdity. And language gets controlled, too. You can't say thin people. They're branded nutrition traders. And freedom. Oh, that's redefined as the right to voluntarily eat till full. Your personal choice about your own body is completely swallowed by state loyalty.
So, after all this time, 70 years, what's the worldview of these new Chinese, the citizens of Piggy country? How do they see themselves? How do they see the rest of us?
Well, the sources paint a picture of a deeply, deeply warped perspective. Their view of the world is totally self-centered. They've been taught their whole lives that Piggy country is the absolute center of everything, the peak of true Chinese culture. Other countries that haven't adopted the plump lifestyle, they're seen as backward, maybe even uncivilized. And there's this strong undercurrent of hostility and superiority. The state media constantly calls Westerners thin bullies who are trying to undermine Piggy country's glorious shared prosperity. They genuinely believe eating plump is right and that being thin isn't just unhealthy, it's actually disloyal.
So any criticism from outside?
Just bounces off. Automatically dismissed as interference in internal affairs. They're isolated by the information control. They basically worship Piggy and his successors, and they believe their rise, their dominance is just historically inevitable. Everyone else will eventually see the light and adopt the plump model.
They must be really confused about why anyone else is thin then.
Oh, the sources say they totally are. They see it as like barbarism or maybe just extreme poverty. They're taught it's because those other countries just don't have enough food, or they've been tricked by Western brainwashing into rejecting Piggy country's advanced plump culture.
Wow.
And this confusion breeds this weird kind of missionary zeal. They feel they have this duty to liberate the thin lands, export their lifestyle, share prosperity. Though the sources mention some radicals even pushing for plump aid, basically forcing other countries to adopt their eating habits.
Force-feeding other countries.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Now, some internal doubts might exist, but yeah, they're heavily suppressed. And their view of Hainan and Taiwan, it's completely rigid, totally ingrained. They genuinely believe these islands always belong to Piggy country. Their separation is just temporary, and bringing them back is this sacred historical mission.
Hammered home constantly.
Daily. Media, schools, kids reciting slogans. It's relentless. And they're hostile and mocking towards both places. The Hainan CCP are just rebel remnants. Taiwan is a thin, splittist entity and not eating plump. That's the ultimate betrayal of Chinese identity. Propaganda constantly paints them as weak, unpatriotic, and of course, thin.
So most people support using force.
Under this regime's influence, yeah. Most support using force to bring back any place not plump, seeing eating plump as the absolute symbol of national unity and prosperity.
It's just amazing how this completely absurd premise, mandatory overeating, becomes so central to their entire identity and how they view the world.
And that's really the core insight the sources are driving at, right? This whole scenario is basically an anti-utopian fable. It uses this extreme absurdity, fatness as loyalty, to show us how totalitarian regimes actually work.
It's not just about laws.
Exactly. They don't just control laws. They try to control reality itself, memory, personal identity. They use every tool they have, diet, education, language to do it. Fatationalism is just totalitarianism with a different name, wrapped up in these ideas of revolution, bloodline, purity.
Yeah.
Making eat plump is patriotic. A rule isn't really about food. It's about taking a cultural standard or even a personal characteristic and turning it into a blunt instrument, a test of political loyalty. It creates this absolute us versus them. If you're not plump, you're not just unhealthy in their eyes, you're a traitor to the nation.
Okay, so after these 70 long years, Piggy country controls the mainland, but it hasn't actually achieved that total unification. Hainan and Taiwan are still out there. What roles do they play in this incredibly long standoff, according to the sources?
Well, this protracted situation really highlights different kinds of power, different kinds of legitimacy, doesn't it? You've got Piggy country. They control the vast mainland, so technically they're the victor. But, and this is crucial, they lack that universal value recognition from much of the world, democracy, human rights. That stuff just isn't part of their system.
Right.
And the sources point out something really interesting. Piggy country might actually benefit internally from the fact that Taiwan and Hainan haven't been absorbed yet.
Oh, so?
Because the ongoing non-unification allows them to keep pushing a constant enemy narrative. It helps justify the endless patriotic education, distracts from internal problems like that massive health crisis we talked about, and basically preserves internal cohesion by giving people something external to focus on, to be angry about.
Keeps the pressure on. Okay, what about Hainan Island with the leftover CCP?
They sort of become this marginalized, failed revolutionary entity, a bit like the sources compare it to the KMT on Taiwan after they lost the mainland back in 1949.
A historical relic.
Increasingly seen that way by the world, yeah. Their official line might still be retaking the mainland, but on the global stage, it becomes mostly symbolic talk.
And Taiwan itself.
Wow.
Caught in the middle.
Exactly. It emerges as this genuinely independent entity, having to navigate claims from two different versions of a Chinese regime, Piggy country's True Han thing, and the Hainan CCP's remnant PRC claim. The sources really emphasize that Taiwan, in this scenario, achieves a kind of de-Sinicization from both of those claims, forging its own distinct identity. It ends up being seen by outsiders, the sources suggest, as this kind of Asian freedom fortress.
Because it's democratic.
Precisely because it's democratically thriving right next door to two different flavors of totalitarian rule. It stands out even more.
That's a powerful image. How is this bizarre plump nationalism regime viewed by the rest of the world after 70 years? I mean, it must look utterly strange.
Oh, it's seen as deeply disturbing, often kind of ridiculous, but also genuinely dangerous. From the U.S. perspective, for instance, this whole fat is justice ideology is just another form of totalitarianism. You'd see media and academics focusing on exposing the absurdity and the oppression, coining terms like food censorship, nutrition thought control.
And military actions.
Any military moves by Piggy country flyovers near Taiwan, naval stuff in the South China Sea would be seen as classic expansionism, gray zone tactics, constantly pushing boundaries without starting an all-out war. Much like, the sources imply, how the U.S. currently views China's wolf warrior diplomacy.
Okay. And the EU.
The EU view would be heavily values-driven. They'd absolutely condemn using culture and nationalism to oppress people who don't fit the mold, especially calling out the pressure on Taiwan, Hainan, and minorities. You'd see NGOs campaigning on dietary freedom as a human right, criticizing state control over personal choices. The sources suggest parallels to how the EU approaches human rights issues in places like Xinjiang today.
What about Taiwan's perspective? They're living right next door to this.
For Taiwan, the scenario actually strengthens their own national identity and narrative. They can point across the strait and say, see, eating plump isn't patriotic. Free choice about your own body, that's a human right.
Yeah, it's a clear contrast.
Totally. They'd see Piggy country actively trying to export its totalitarianism through this binge-eating ideology. And the sources suggest they'd fight back with anti-plump cognitive warfare, creating health campaigns, maybe satirical music, memes, anything to counter Piggy country's propaganda.
They might even coin slogans.
Yeah, like the source suggested, I want to slim freely, not be a calorie war criminal.
That really captures the absurdity perfectly.
It cuts right to the core, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And the neighbors, South Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, they'd be constantly on edge. Military provocations from Piggy country would push them towards greater regional defense cooperation. And their media, probably openly mocking the whole fat equals national strength idea as a way to culturally push back.
And just looking at it from an international law angle,
Piggy country's historical claims, seen as violating self-determination, their military actions, classic provocations, graze zone tactics, and the core ideology, fat equals loyalty. That's viewed as straightforward political censorship and thought control, a fundamental denial of personal freedom.
which brings us, I think, to the real heart of this whole thought experiment, doesn't it? The deeper, often really uncomfortable questions it forces us to ask, questions that go way beyond just this hypothetical scenario.
Exactly. The sources really push us to confront some fundamental ideas, like what truly makes a nation legitimate? Is it bloodline, shared history, geography? Or is it, maybe ultimately, the free choice of the people living there?
Because here, both Piggy and the Hinnom CCP claim legitimacy.
Right. But the actual voice, the choice of the people on the mainland seems completely lost in their systems. And can education actually create truth? I mean, after 70 years of this intense fatationalism, the new Chinese genuinely believe fat equals justice. This absurd rule is just, it makes you question. When education becomes pure indoctrination designed to shut down critical thinking and just enforce the state narrative, is it even education anymore? Or is it just a political weapon?
Yeah, that's a heavy one.
And how should the rest of the world deal with a regime like this? Is there any obligation to intervene even when a country's bizarre policies seem mostly internal, especially when that country starts making, binge eating a condition of its national identity or foreign policy?
And internally, would Taiwan and Hainan ever team up?
That's another question the sources raise. Could they overcome their own history to face the bigger threat from Piggy country, or would they stay divided? And this whole politicization of body shape, fat versus thin, it becomes this stark symbol of values. Obedience versus freedom. Could that lead to totally new human rights issues? Like, could you have forced eaters seeking asylum, people becoming food refugees in the thin lands because they refuse to gain weight?
It sounds absurd, but within this scenario.
It makes a terrifying kind of sense. And what about minorities? That pure Han idea was central to Piggy's revolution, and fatationalism is just layered on top. What's their ultimate fate? Forced assimilation, cultural genocide. And could that extreme, rigid nationalism actually become a weakness, maybe eventually destabilizing the regime from within?
Then there's the sheer cost, right? Not just health.
Exactly. Not just the individual health crisis, but the environmental costs too. Forcing overeating on a national scale puts this immense strain on resources, on food production. Can a policy that's so fundamentally unreasonable, so unsustainable, actually last long term? Especially facing real-world stuff like climate change or resource shortages. Could those crises be the thing that finally triggers an internal collapse?
And exporting this extreme cultural idea, how does that mess with the international order?
Could something this weird, this totalizing, lead to a new kind of Cold War, dividing the world not just by politics, but by, dietary values? Can you even have global cooperation on big issues, climate, pandemics, when one major power is operating under such a strange, inwardly focused logic?
And maybe the biggest question of all, is popular awakening even possible after 70 years of relentless brainwashing?
Right. What could possibly trigger it? Maybe the personal suffering from the health crisis finally hits a tipping point. Economic hardship. Or maybe that tiny trickle of outside information getting through those black market VPNs.
Right.
Can a totalitarian system, no matter how absurd its rules seem from the outside, truly last forever?
It's a lot to think about.
Ultimately, the sources use the sheer, almost comedic absurdity of the fat equals loyalty rule to make a really crucial point. It strips away all the familiar political jargon and forces us to see the raw mechanics of how totalitarian regimes control narratives, control identities, even try to control our most basic personal choices, like what we eat. It challenges us to look past the surface craziness and ask these really sharp, fundamental questions about legitimacy, about freedom, and about the nature of reality itself when it's dictated entirely by power.
That was quite the journey. A very, very strange possible future we just walked through. Thank you again for sending in the source material that took us down this particular rabbit hole.
It was certainly memorable.
It really drives home the point, doesn't it? That sometimes the most outlandish scenarios, the ones that feel completely impossible, can actually give us the clearest insights into how power works and how societies and the people in them can be shaped in ways that seem utterly bizarre from the outside, but become completely terrifyingly normalized from within the system.
Yeah.
So let me leave you, our listener, with one final provocative thought from this deep dive. If you lived in Piggy country, under the thumb of fatationalism, facing that AI weight checker, all the social pressure, what would you do? Would you genuinely choose to eat plump, to fit in, to believe? Would you just pretend, keep your head down, eat plump to survive? Or would you risk everything to resist, or try to escape to those mythical thin lands?
It's a tough question.
It is. And what does your hypothetical choice reveal about your own perspective on freedom, conformity, resistance? Or maybe, even more unnervingly, step back and ask, are you already living within some kind of plump logic system right now, accepting certain beliefs, certain behaviors as totally normal without even realizing they've been subtly shaped or dictated for you by forces outside yourself?
Food for thought, perhaps literally in this case.
Indeed. We'll leave that with you to mull over. This has been The Deep Dive. Remember to subscribe to The Deep Dive wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss our next exploration. And hey, just a quick shout out, our old friend Micky. He's got some great new wine tasting videos up on his YouTube channel recently. If you're into that sort of thing, definitely go check them out. They're actually really fun.
Good recommendation.
And until next time, keep questioning those narratives.
Perspective really is everything.